Story number 16. The Feast of Stephen. Hello, I'm Stephanie Swenson, and I grew up in Victoria, Minnesota. My parents were first-generation immigrants from Czechoslovakia, and they would proudly tell you that they are Bohemian, and their name, Svoboda, became Americanized when they came to the United States in 1948. I have one older brother, John, and then we have Stephen. Actually, I came here tonight to tell you about Stephen. But first, some background. The heart of this story takes place when I was in 6th grade. I loved school, I loved the basketball team, I was super involved in Girl Scouts and in my little church choir. My older brother John was just starting high school that year and was a star player on the hockey team. We were only a few blocks from downtown Victoria, but back then Victoria was not a grown-up town with useful stores like grocery stores and hardware stores and clothing stores. So we had to go to Chaska or to another big city if we needed any of those things. But Victoria was a kid's paradise. There was an ice cream store that was open from Easter to Christmas, a bookstore with a reading loft, a bait shop that my dad and brother loved, a superette for emergencies, a skating rink behind Floyd's bar, and a Dairy Queen that was open in the summer. The neighborhood I lived in was mostly families just like us. Most of us shared similar traditions and customs, and most of us went to the community church in Victoria. Later, I found out that we were a pretty homogeneous group with regard to ancestry as well when I read an article in the Victoria Gazette that referred to us as a German-Czech cultural enclave. The extended Swenson family is pretty close, even geographically. We have grandparents, aunts, and uncles and cousins that live in Chaska and Belle Plaine and Waconia. Only one of my mother's brothers broke with tradition and settled in Chicago. Of course, we still have lots of family back in Czechoslovakia, which is now called the Czech Republic. When I was 7, our family took a trip to that hometown in Czechoslovakia called Nymburk. It's not too far from Prague. My mom and dad were so excited to reconnect with family and to show us off to the relatives we had never met. It was a glorious trip. I got to meet my mother's mother and father, the grandparents I had never met, some aunts and uncles, and a few cousins. During that week, we were spoiled and pampered like royalty. The food is not quite what we were used to here. It was a little like what we eat on Christmas Eve every night. 9 courses and hours around the dinner table. Hard. It was hard, but beautiful. They had pulled out the red carpet for us. During our visit, we saw lots of castles and churches, a really cool park with these tall stone outcroppings everywhere. But what made the biggest impression on me was hearing the story of King Wenceslas. He is a national hero there. There's a whole giant chapel in the Prague Museum that's dedicated just to him. And there are paintings and statues of him everywhere. The town square is named King Wenceslas Court. He is celebrated everywhere as a good and kind king. In fact, he was a saint. I heard this story many times on our visit, and I felt when I left to come home, I wanted to celebrate him as well. I knew he always sang that song at Christmas, but I really didn't know his story. It's such a great story, and it's all there in that Christmas carol. Do you guys know that one? Good King Wenceslas? Well, I have asked Lisette to have the lyrics printed on the card. So if you want to follow around, I'm going to read you that story as it comes to us through that Christmas carol, and you can read along if you'd like. Good King Wenceslas looked out on the feast of Stephen, when the snow lay round about, deep and crisp and even. Brightly shone the moon that night, though the frost was cruel, when a poor man came in sight, gathering winter fuel. Hither, page, and stand by me, if thou knowest it, telling, yonder peasant, who is he, where and what his dwelling? Sire, he lives a good league hence, underneath the mountain, right against the forest fence, by St. Agnes' fountain. Bring me flesh and bring me wine, bring me pine logs hither. Thou and I shall see him dine when we bear them thither. Page and monarch, forth they went together, through the rude wind's wild lament and the bitter weather. Sire, the night is darker now, and the wind blows stronger. Fails my heart, I know not how I can go on longer. Mark my footsteps, good my page. Tread thou in them boldly. Thou shalt find the winter's rage freeze thy blood less coldly. In his master's steps he trod, where the snow lay dinted. Heat was in the very sod which the saint had printed. Therefore, Christian men, be sure, wealth or rank possessing, ye who now will bless the poor, shall yourselves find blessing. Now, in more common English, the story kind of goes like this. Once upon a time, there's a good king and his young page, and they were walking around the kingdom on a cold and crisp night, and they had seen this poor man in the distance collecting wood. And Wenceslas said to his page, go find out who that poor man is, and then go gather meat and drink and firewood so that we can bring it to his house. Now, during the journey, the page was about to give up because he was struggling against the cold weather when Wenceslas tells him, just follow in my footsteps. And miraculously, as the servant steps into the king's footprints, he feels the warmth of the king's generosity emanating in the snow, and he has the power to go on. Mission accomplished. Now we hear the moral of this tale, the one that hit my heart so hard, in those last two lines. Ye who now will bless the poor, shall yourselves find blessing. I remember writing those down in my journal at one time and taking them to memory. It was one of those surreal moments when I realized that somehow my life had shifted. As a kid, I always wanted to do more for those who had less. In fact, I couldn't wait to get started. I could just picture that little hand-hewn hut on the edge of the mountain with no heat and no food. And I knew that there were enough people that lived around in my community who had need of help as well. Now, for the Swensons, we usually do good around Christmas time. And so when I was in the 6th grade, I had outgrown making my list for Santa. And I no longer worried that Santa was keeping a list of all the good things I did and all the bad things I did. But I still wanted to do good for goodness sake, with King Wenceslas as my role model. So I became obsessed with that carol when Christmas time came around. And I found ways to work those words of that last line into conversations. It's almost like those devout fans of Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol who run around shouting, God bless us, everyone. I would go around saying, you who bless the poor shall find yourselves a blessing. You know how that song says, on the feast of Stephen. Remember that in the second line? I finally figured it out. The feast of Stephen is the day after Christmas, and it's named for St. Stephen, who is the first martyr in biblical times. Well, King Wenceslas was born with the name Vaclav the Good. And while he moved his way up to becoming king, he did good things until he was assassinated by his brother, Boleslaw the Bad. Now, that's a true story. You can look that one up on Google. So the good king became a martyr, and as a result of that, he was awarded sainthood by the Catholic Church. That's also true. Saint King Wenceslas. So now the Feast of Stephen became a day of doing good and helping the poor. Now the English adopted this day, and they call it Boxing Day. You might be more familiar with that term. And it's a day when in England the royalty and the wealthy families would take and box up all of those gifts that they didn't want or need, and they'd take it in all the leftovers of their meal, and they would take it to their servants and give it to them and give them the day off on the day after Christmas, because of course they didn't have Christmas off. So it became known as Boxing Day. Now I think if we were to update that to us in our culture, it might look something like the day of returning the boxes. Returning all those gifts we don't like, we don't need, and we don't have room for. And I think we can learn something from King Wenceslas. So I decided maybe I should try to convince my family to celebrate that day. Now, it's our custom, like probably many of you, to go to church on Christmas Eve and eat lots and lots of food. And we do. We eat lots and lots of food on Christmas Eve, and then on Christmas Day, repeat. And then the next day, I don't know. We either go to the stores or we collapse. So there was 1 year after my trip to the Czech Republic that I got 2 identical Barbie dolls. And it hit me hard that year. Who needs 2 identical Barbie dolls? So I was doing my Wenceslas thing, and I wrapped up that Barbie doll, that extra one, and I brought it to church, and I put it under the tree on Christmas morning. And I just put a little note on it. If there's somebody who didn't get a Barbie doll this year, please give it to them. I didn't know what happened to that Barbie doll, but it was gone the next Sunday. And I realized it hopefully was in the arms of another little girl who didn't get one. Then 1 year, Miss Jody, is Miss Jody in the room tonight? Miss Jody, she was at our church back in Victoria too. She gave us the idea to make Advent bags. And so I got excited about this. She said these bags would go to families who didn't get as the bounty we got, maybe to homeless families. And they needed to have some useful things in them. So for the season of Advent that year, we started collecting things. Every single bag had a toothbrush and toothpaste, some of those towelettes, and some socks, and an orange. My mom always put an orange in our stocking every year, so we had to put an orange in there. And some protein bars. That's an updated version of what goes in those bags. And a new game or toy or book. And we ended up collecting enough to put together 26 bags. And I convinced my family that we needed to take them down to Harbor Lights on the day after Christmas with a big plate of Christmas cookies. It felt good. It felt good to do that. And then that same year, that next year, then I was in 6th grade. On the day after Thanksgiving, we had a special delivery letter that came to our house. I remember it so well. We decided to open it over our meal that evening because the letter was from the Czech Republic, addressed to the Swenson family, 4725 Bavarian Boulevard, Victoria, Minnesota. We were excited to hear news from Nymburk and eager to read about what had happened to our family from so far away. About halfway through, we knew this was not a casual greeting. It was very serious. Carla, the woman who had lived with our grandparents, was killed in an automobile accident, leaving a young son exactly my age. I remember Carla. She was like part of the family. And I remembered her son. He had bright red hair and lots of freckles. Dad read on. We have an unusual request. Our sweet Stephen is now an orphan. He's a wonderful student and a lovely young man, and he needs a home. There is no family here in Nymburk who can care for him. We are too old to give him the opportunities he deserves. He finally remembers your visit 4 years ago, and he spoke with joy as he saw in your family what it might mean to belong to a family. You see, he has not known a father in all of his years. Would you consider adopting him into your home? We know he will flourish in this new environment if he is surrounded by family, and that is our greatest dream for him. With love, Grandma and Grandpa Norvold. Wow. What do you say after you read a letter like that? Immediately, I thought, without thinking of any of the consequences, cool. Having a brother my age, wow. The more the merrier. My brother, John, was quiet. I bet he thought he'd have to share his bedroom. Mom and Dad looked back and forth at each other and at us, and Mom finally said, we'll need to sleep on this. This is a big request, and it will change many things. And so we did. But that night, we did not get much sleep. But the next day we got busy, and after a unanimous decision, we found we had only 2 weeks to prepare for Stephen's arrival. We were all thinking the same thing. What are we going to do to make this transition good for Stephen? What will he think of our little town? How will he react to our Swenson Christmas? What, how? At 3:46 p.m. on December 9th, Flight 1349 landed in MSP Airport, and we were all gathered at the gate, having been given permission to meet this new son and brother as he came off the plane. We brought a few gifts for him, not gold or frankincense or myrrh, but a Twins t-shirt and a Viking stocking cap and a Wild jersey. It was not hard to recognize Stephen. He was a little older and taller, but he still had that red hair. That was one amazing day and one life-shifting Christmas. Now, 40 years later, I can truly appreciate the gift of that Christmas. A child, a son, a brother came into our family to bring joy and light to our world. He fit right in. And because of Stephen, I think, Uncle Fred from Chicago started traveling to Minnesota for Christmas. We added a new celebration to the Swenson Christmas season, the Feast of Stephen, which we have celebrated every year on the day after Christmas. It's the day we celebrate our good fortune when Stephen came into our family, and a day that we all get together to collaborate, to know how to share our fortune with the less fortunate. Over the years, this day has grown in importance, and now our kids and our kids' kids are celebrating that with us. Friends have come into the group, other family members, our church family. We all conspire on that day to do good in remembrance of King Wenceslas. This Christmas, as we all celebrate the birth of the Christ child from the warmth of our homes and from this beautiful church, let's also remember the gift of family in whatever form it comes to us, and give thanks for all the good gifts that come from God, for we are among the most fortunate. Remembering the greatest gifts come to us sometimes in the form of a child who bids us, who begs us to love and care for one another. God bless us, everyone. Ye who bless the poor shall yourselves find blessing. Be the blessing this year. Amen.